Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to be talking about Dungeons & Dragons 6th Edition and killing the byline. Alright, so 6th Edition, we're approaching 6th Edition. We know that for a fact. There absolutely is going to be a 6th Edition of Dungeons & Dragons. The only question is when, right? So, basically, 6th Edition is huge. The next edition of Dungeons & Dragons is always a big deal, because of the changes that are going to occur in the game. And every single edition has brought some pretty dramatic changes, all right? So it is my opinion that Wizards of the Coast should kill the byline in 6th edition. Now, what do I mean by this, right? Well, specifically, this means basically right now in 1st through 5th edition, you open up hardback DMG Player's Handbook, Monster Manual, they're all the same. You open up the first hardcover, okay? Then you have kind of two matte pages. You turn, and then there's a Dungeons & Dragons plate page. You turn one more page, and it's the buy page. Here's everybody who wrote content for this edition of Dungeons & Dragons. Here's the lead. Here's the lead of the team. All that type of thing, right? You know, so you have this really specific set of listings of human beings who worked on the book. You have the art director, you have the design lead, you have, you know, people who did the narrative pieces, you know, and there's no less than 20, there's like 20 to 50 people listed in there, right? Well, it is my opinion that should change. That whole page should go away, and the first page should be, you know, Dungeons & Dragons, and then it should say Hasbro Gaming. I'm predicting now Wizards of the Coast will probably be gone by the time that 6th edition comes out. I don't think there's really a need for Wizards of the Coast anymore. You could just call it what it is, Hasbro Gaming, right? I'm not sure there's really a need for Wizards of the Coast to exist as a unique company anymore. Hasbro has proven itself for Dungeons & Dragons. Alright, so basically you would have the Dungeons & Dragons nameplate at the top, and then it would say, by the Dungeons & Dragons design team, right? And essentially every single one of those 50 human names would just be represented by those two words, and absolutely no one's human name would be written on that book, right? Now, first of all, I'm going to give my reason why, and then I'll address some objections I expect people will have. Okay, the reason why is back in earlier this year in 2019, I think it was in spring 2019, it became apparent that there was one specific contributor to the 5th edition core rules. His name was in the Player's Handbook, and this gentleman was essentially accused online of some major problems as far as behavior toward other human beings, right? Like it was, you know, exceptionally, their etiquette was completely off, their behavior within the community was bad, you know, it was not good for Dungeons & Dragons, right? And then not only, and people, you know, just lambasted this person online, said this person is a terrible person, right? And then people were on Twitter were taking pictures of their Player's Handbook with this person's name blacked out, right? And then, you know, there was a lot of talk about going forward, this person's name should be removed from future copies of the game. And you're like, oh boy, you know. And then in addition to that, people came in and were saying that Mike Mearls, you know, when Mike Mearls didn't respond fast enough, people were saying, you know, Mike Mearls is complicit, you know, in just allowing this to go on and not decrying this behavior. It was a bad situation. Okay, all right. So that was kind of a black eye on Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition specifically that lasted for a month or two, right? So, you know, now to me, that's scary, right? I don't like the idea of people going in and physically marking up their player handbook because they feel, you know, that somebody doesn't deserve to be there, right? But the reality is, this kind of problem, this is going to exist big time going forward, right? I don't think this is ever going to stop, right? It's not an issue of, people change, right? So you can hire somebody, they can be what they really are isn't known at the time. Then your game comes out, and suddenly you have a bad situation, right? So I think, to kind of give the game more protection going forward, I think the byline should die, okay? And then on Wizards of the Coast site, what they could do, and actually, you know what? Wizards of the Coast doesn't need to solve this in any way, right? So what they can do is essentially list no one in the book, and don't tell anyone who's on the team and has whatever roles, right? And the reason why is the internet will collect that information. That will absolutely be locked in. They're like, I have a list of D&D creators who work directly for Wizards of the Coast that I follow on Twitter. And, so I have a really strong idea, Todd Krennic and Chris Perkins and Mike Merles and Kate Welch and, quite a few others who work, so I have a really strong idea of who's working on Dungeons & Dragons at specific times, right? And I think the internet will just collect that information, right? And then, what's going to happen is there will be people, so then at that point, when there is a problem like this, it's going to be, I think it will be easier to parse out that person, right? Because they simply will be part of the design team. And by getting rid of the byline, it's saying to the community, listen, we did the best we could, to make sure that the right people were building this, but overall the community rejected that approach, and so going forward, we're just going to have design, by the Dungeons & Dragons design team, right? Now, I already hear your objection, right? You're saying, well, people want to get credit for their work, and if you don't give them credit for your work, who are you going to get to work on Dungeons & Dragons? Well, the reality is, it is incredibly easy to get people to work on Dungeons & Dragons. It's probably the easiest job to hire people for. It's one of the easiest jobs to hire people for in the world. Like, people will absolutely work on the Dungeons & Dragons product with no byline, right? Because, and I'm convinced that the vast majority of the people who are working on Dungeons & Dragons right now, absolutely none of them are doing it for money, right? Every single person who's at Wizards of the Coast, actually, tabletop role-playing game work is notoriously underpaid, right? So the reality is, and you would think, oh man, what about the byline, right? That's going to be taking even less away from it. And the reality is, I think when you come to tabletop role-playing game design, the people who are in tabletop role-playing game design are there really they are there specifically for, that ability to say, hey, I have, that ability to declare, I've worked on these games, right? They want that street cred, within the TRPG streets, they want that street cred, and it really, I don't really think anyone working in tabletop role-playing games goes into that industry for money. And the reason why is the type of creative artistic skills that you need to be good at TRPGs, you can get paid more almost anywhere else, right? And the reason why is tabletop role-playing games are one of the best hobbies in the world, and they are one of the absolute worst business models for games, right? You charge $50 a book for 3 different books. It's $150. People can use those books for 10 years, right? And never come back for even a single additional book. It's a terrible, terrible, terrible business model. And so it doesn't really pay well. It's really bad from a business perspective. So the reality is, so basically you're like, well, how are you going to get to people if they're not making any money, if they're not making great money, and they don't have a byline now? Well, that's the thing. It's Dungeons & Dragons, right? Literally the pay for that job is being able to tell people I was on the design team for Dungeons & Dragons. And tons of people use just that one sentence incredibly effectively. Many of them go off and work for other TRPG companies because it'll open a lot of doors. Working on Dungeons & Dragons is the Harvard of careers in TRPG, right? Once you have worked for Wizards of the Coast, even on a supplementary project, right? It's easier to go to other publishers and say, listen, I worked for WotC, or I was on the design team, And that's going to be the reward, right? And basically, I definitely understand what people are saying. They'll say, well, no, nobody's going to work for a little bit of money and no byline, right? But the reality is they will absolutely be able to fill the team out. And the reason why is Dungeons and Dragons is the banner, right? And also, that's why it is my opinion that this should be done. Dungeons and Dragons is the big dog. It is more important than any one person. And frankly, we all know that Gary Gygax created the game, Mike Merle saved the game, and Kate Welch is going to be the design lead on 6th edition. What more do we need to know, right? Like, right? Like, it's not like, basically, yes, we should know huge high-end names in the creation of the game, but the reality is the protection of the game and giving it a bit of a remove from these terrible actors that are going to continue to crop up, right? I don't think Mike Merle's made any mistake in who he hired. He hired the best people he could at the time, and people are human; they can't see the future, right? So this is a good way to actually protect the game going forward. It's painful. I don't like this. It would be nice if we could just keep the bylines. And the reality is, I think we could keep the bylines if people were willing to be reasonable with just understanding that that there are going to be bad actors on big projects, right? If you have a large project, the number of people who are involved, you're going to have a bad actor in there somewhere. It's just numbers, right? But that nuanced opinion, it just doesn't resonate today, right? People are, we live in an era where sensitivity is elevated over truth, right? And so in that era, I think this is a good way to protect Dungeons & Dragons. And frankly, protecting Dungeons & Dragons for the long term is a lot more important than giving a few people direct attribution, because there will be indirect attribution, right? These people will go right onto their Twitter accounts, right onto their Facebook accounts and say, hey, I was hired by Dungeons & Dragons and working on this aspect of the game, right? So why actually take the time to put that in the book if people are going to mark up and destroy those books, right? Like, it's really sad to me that, some number, and perhaps even a significant number of 5th edition books are now marred because of one bad actor, right? So this is just one idea that, in my opinion, will actually protect the game from bad actors that are going to pop up in the future, right? So it was a little scarier this year where, people were like, it's very scary when people are marring books. That is frightening, right? That gets a little frightening, and I'm like, hey, that's not a good thing, right? So if this removes that and helps our books be preserved, I really think it's a good idea. So that's my opinion. I'd love to hear what you think on this subject. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful day.